In this tutorial, we're going to go over how to create a survey. First, log into your website as the administrator. Next, go to the admin page and find the surveys icon and click it. You're now on the administration page for surveys. To add a new survey, click New. Here we have the edit form for creating a survey question. Now, as a brief introduction, surveys can consist of one question or multiple questions. The setup process is very similar either way. There's just one extra step if it's a multi-step survey. So we're going to create a multi-step survey, but I'm going to leave out the portions where I create the subsequent questions. I'm just going to create one question so you can see that process for this form. And then what I'll do is I'll create some other questions offline and come back and show you how to link those together to make a multiple question survey, because the process for creating each question is the same. So let's add our first question. The title is a brief multi-word summary of this question. So for example, let's say we want to do a survey about the community, and we want to ask first, do residents want to have speed bumps installed in their community? So our first title will be something like speed bumps. And that's mostly to tell the administrator what this question's about. You don't need to repeat the entire question there. It's just really when you as the administrator are going to be looking at these surveys in a list that you have, these questions in a list, you want to be able to identify which question this is. So the next fields we have here are starts and expires. These are required, so we're going to need to enter a starting date, and I'm going to put in today's date. And we're going to need an ending date, so I'll give it a week. And you can also select the time if you want, the starting time and ending time on a particular day. If you say, I want the voting to end at 5 p.m. on that day, you can choose that from the list. The next field is the restrict to field. And if you've been working on this site doing administration functions, you probably recognize this from other areas like news or documents. This allows you to restrict this particular question to a certain subset of the community. So you might want to restrict this to certain, like for example, a renters group versus an owners group. We see that a lot. Or you may have just the board members. You may say this is a survey just for board members. And so you can restrict it there. For now, we're going to leave this blank, which means that anybody can take this survey. Anybody who's a registered member can take the survey. Surveys cannot be taken by non-registered members. So the first thing we need to do here is insert a question, and we're going to put in the actual question that we want members to answer. So in this case, we're going to say, should we have speed bumps? The details is going to be additional text that's going to appear on the question page that you want people to know about this question. It's kind of a more detailed explanation of what it is they're answering. So you might have a paragraph in here that says, you know, we've noticed that there's a lot of speeding in the community and we want to slow traffic down, so we think speed bumps might be helpful. Answer yes if you think we should have speed bumps. Answer no if you don't like the idea of speed bumps. So for the most part, most of your questions will probably be very simple questions. You know, you may have a survey that is taking a poll or actually voting on who should be the next board president. And those don't generally need an explanation. It's just a choice. So I'm going to leave that blank for now, but you can use that as you feel for your question if you think it requires further explanation. And that text will appear on the same page when the person takes the survey. They'll see that text below the question to help explain it. So in this case, here are the responses. And this is a pretty simple case. We're just going to have two responses, yes and no. The write-in checkbox allows you to say that this particular response is going to be a write-in field for the person taking the survey. You see that a lot more on ballots for voting on things like people, like board members or other types of positions. Or you might have write-ins for a particular type of solution. What should we use for traffic control measures? And the first response might be speed bumps. The second one might be a gate. The third one might be write-in. Tell us what you think. Now, it's important to note when you have a write-in selection, whether it's for a board member or a traffic control measure, that's free text that the user can type into. So it's not going to be a specific selection. Now, how this matters is the system is going to automatically tally the votes. It's going to tell you at the end of the voting period how many people said yes and how many people said no in this particular case. If we had a write-in answer, those cannot be easily tallied because someone, for example, let's go back to the case of a board member being selected. If somebody writes in John Smith as the person they want to write in to be the next board member, somebody else writes in Jonathan Smith. A third person types in J, the initial J Smith, and somebody else just types in Smith. The system can't reliably tally those together. It doesn't know that they all mean the same person, even though the people voting intended to mean the same person, because there's only one person called Smith on the ballot. So it's obvious to humans, but for the computer, because they're not the same, it can't make assumptions. It's too easy to make mistakes that way. So you won't see write-in votes tallied as a count on the final reports. You'll see the number of answers for yes and no in this particular case. But if we had a write-in, you wouldn't see the number. That's something that, as an administrator, when you go to look at the votes, you'd have to read the votes individually and manually track them to say, I know that John Smith is the same result as Jay Smith, and record that as 2 votes for the same person. So it's important to know that when you do write-in votes, the system is not going to be able to provide a report at the end that says, here's the write-in that got the most votes, because it doesn't know if one write-in is intended to be the same as another write-in. So keep that in mind when you're doing write-ins. Like, again, you're mostly going to see that on ballots for voting for people, but it's something to be aware of. The rest of the fields are as follows. The submit button text can either be vote or submit. And that's used for when the person is submitting the actual survey they're taking or the ballot. The button at the bottom can either say submit on it or vote. So if you're doing a ballot where you're voting for an official vote for who should be on the board, you'll probably want to select vote. In this case, we're not voting, we're just doing a survey. So we're going to say submit is the button text we want. And then this is the question type text. And what that means is throughout the taking of the survey by the user, it may have prompts on the screen that say, this is when you complete the survey. These are system messages that the system creates that are appearing on the screen need to know whether to use the word survey or ballot. So if it's a vote for board members, you might want to select the word ballot. It may say, thank you for submitting your ballot, as opposed to thank you for submitting your survey. So this allows you to select which word is more appropriate for your particular question, for this particular question, in terms of what the user sees on their screen. Again, this is restricted to messages generated by the application itself. It's not going to affect any text that you enter up in here. You can enter, please answer this question for the survey. This ballot question is important because. So you can type whatever text you want, and that won't be changed. This is simply going to relate to text and prompts that the application itself is generating. It wants it to be as close to the proper meaning that you've intended, whether this is a ballot or a survey. These options, I'll go over quickly. They are actually available in the help down here. You can click on admin help and it gives you a short description of each of these and how they work. There's also these little help pop-up prompts you'll see throughout the system. Again, you've seen these before for these last 3. So allow a voter to select multiple responses up to however many selections. You may have a case where you want the person to pick their top 3 choices or something similar. So you might have 10 responses here and you want the user to pick up to 3. Each user that votes can choose 3 at the same time. So you can check this box and you would select 3. And that will allow them to have a checkbox next to each of the options they can choose. Normally what will happen is when they see, if we were to uncheck this and just leave it set, leave it as a 1 selection only, you choose the 1 answer. And I'll go back to that example of, instead of saying, do you want speed bumps? It might say, which traffic control measures should we use in the community? List your top 3. And I might list 10 of them here. Well, we might have speed bumps, we might have a gate, we might have, speed signs that show your speed electronically, and so forth and so on. Police monitoring. So we might have all these different options, and we might want the people to choose their top 2 or 3. So we can select down here, select 2. Now, normally, if we don't allow them to select more than 1, for example, like what we have here, this yes or no, when the person takes the survey, they're just going to see a little button next to each of these. And if they select yes, it unchecks no. If they select no, it unchecks yes. It only lets them check 1 at a time because it only allows 1 answer to that question. However, if we check this box and say allow up to 3, what's going to happen is it's going to allow them to select more than 1 answer. So they'll have a checkbox as opposed to the little circle button that lets them choose only 1. So they could check this box, and check this box. And all 3 would stay checked because the system is allowing them to have multiple responses. So in this case, we're doing a very simple question where we're only going to allow 1. You can see I left this at 3, but because this box is unchecked, this is grayed out and it is no longer in effect. So it doesn't matter what I leave this at if this box is unchecked. Okay, going through the rest of these, allow voter to add comments. If I check that box, it's going to put a free-form box on the screen similar to this box up here, where the user can type in a whole paragraph of comments. Again, nothing is done with that in terms of voting responses. It's not going to affect the counts on any particular vote. It is simply a way for you to collect free-form comments from people. For example, you might say, choose your preferred speed control method, and then you might have a statement in the details saying, in the comments box, please tell us why. Just because you're looking to solicit more details about why people want these responses. Next one is highlight this survey. Highlighting the survey is an option that goes with another setting. There's a way to include active surveys on your homepage, kind of like you include the other info boxes like what's new, upcoming events, recent news, those little boxes where you insert the tag on your homepage. If you're not familiar with those, you can ignore what I just said. It's just going to make it more confusing. But if you've played around with inserting those boxes on your homepage, there's a box you can insert for showing current surveys. Highlight this survey means include it in that list, because you could have 50 surveys and you don't want to see a box on your homepage with 50 surveys listed. So this will allow this particular question to appear in that box of surveys that's shown on the homepage when you insert that special tag. I won't go into that anymore right now. In general, you don't need to use this. This is a very uncommon option. It's not going to do anything in particular. When a user goes in and clicks on the surveys menu option up here to take a survey, it's not going to affect that at all. It doesn't highlight it in there in any way. It doesn't do anything special with it in terms of getting the user to notice it. It's only if you're using those special tags. Hide this survey. That's done for a few reasons. One of them, the most common one is this might more accurately be called hide this question, because if you have a survey that has multiple questions, this would allow you to hide this particular question. And that will be automatically checked for you when you do a multi-question survey, because you're only going to have the first question listed in the list of surveys for people to choose from. The other questions in that survey are hidden from that list. You don't need to worry about it for that purpose. The other purpose is, let's say you're creating a survey and you don't want to announce it on the survey listing page for any reason. It's a special survey. You're just sending it out to maybe a dozen people in the community for some special reason. And for example, you haven't restricted it, but you don't want it visible. You just want to send a link to a certain select group of people and have them take the survey. You can hide it from the list using this option, and nobody will see it. And only the people that receive the link to it that you sent manually, they'll be able to still access it. It's still available. It's just not shown on the main listing. You might also do that if you're working on it. Let's say you're still figuring out the wording of this, and so you want to save it while you're working on it, but you want to come back to it later and fix it next week before you make it live for everyone. Well, you could hide it temporarily, and then when you're ready, come back and uncheck this box, and it'll make it available in the listing. Hide survey vote results. This means after a person takes the survey, it goes to a page where it shows the results normally by default. So they can see what the current status is, how many people voted for each option. It doesn't give out how people voted. It just tells you, 27% voted for option A, 10% for option B, and so forth. You can hide that. So after a person votes, it just says thank you, and they're done. They don't see the results. Keep voter responses anonymous. Secret ballot, in other words. If you don't want the administrators to see how each person voted, this is a commonly used setting. You want all responses to be anonymous. You don't want each person's votes to be associated with their name or their profile. You can check this box. What will happen is in the reporting that the administrator has access to, they'll still be able to see how many votes were cast for each selection, and they will be able to see how each individual response was for each user, but they won't see the user's name. So they'll see a person voted option, yes. Another person option voted no. And a third person voted option yes. So they'll see the list of votes and how each person voted, but they don't see the names. And what that does is those reports, when this option is checked, any reports that would normally say John Smith voted yes, Mary Jones voted no. Rather than doing that, it will have what we call an anonymous ID, which looks like a long alphanumeric random string of characters. And the reason we do that, rather than just omitting it entirely, is that if you have multiple questions on the same survey, on the same ballot, we want you to be able to look at those in the reports and kind of reconstruct a single ballot. Even though you won't know who submitted it, you'll be able to say this person on these 5 questions, they voted this on question 1, this on question 2, this on question 3, and so forth. Because their anonymous ID, even though you don't know who it refers to, will be the same for each question in that survey. So that's the main purpose of that, is to keep survey results anonymous so even the administrator can't see how an individual voted. Email and offer printable receipt after voting. This presents a link on the screen that allows the person who just took the survey, when they've completed and submitted their votes, it allows them to print a receipt. That link is only available while they're on that screen. If they close their browser, it's gone and they can no longer print it. And they must click that link within 15 minutes, otherwise it's no longer active. The email option part of this, it's all the same option, it does both. When you check this box, it will also email them a copy of their receipt. So even if they didn't print it and close their browser, assuming their email is working and their email address and their profile is accurate, they will receive an email copy of their selections. Allow only 1 vote per primary address. This is useful if you have set up your community where anyone can register, anyone in the community can register. So you might have a couple that live at the same house, and they may have kids, and they've all registered, so you have 4 people living at the same address. But it may also be that for specific votes, like board members or other types of questions to the community for official votes, where you only want each property, each household, to have 1 vote. So how do we stop the other members of the family from voting after the first member votes? If you check this box, this question will only allow 1 person per primary address, that's the primary address in their profile, to have a vote. It's up to the family to decide who's going to actually submit that vote. But it will stop anyone else from that same primary address from voting after the first person has voted. Now, what's important to notice here is that normally members can edit their address. So if someone wanted to cheat the system, 2 people in the same household could change their address. One person could put 123 Main Street and spell out the word street. The other person could put 123 Main ST and abbreviate street. The system looks at that as two different addresses. It does try to take away some of the errors with the address. For example, extra spaces at the end, at the beginning, in between things. It tries to parse out the address and do the best it can to get the exact address, the house number or the unit number and the street name. But in general, what we recommend strongly, and it's listed in the little help thing here, a little help pop-up, and also in the admin help, is there's an option in Setup Info, in the Setup Info app, where you can restrict members from editing their primary address. Now that means that the administrator actually has to go in and set up the primary address for each member. Oftentimes you'll import your member listing, and what that allows you to do is if you set that option in Setup Info and you've restricted your the members from editing their primary address, then it stops them from doing what I just described, which is two members, either accidentally or intentionally, setting different addresses for the same household, differently worded addresses for the same household. And therefore, they can't cheat the system in that way, either, again, accidentally or intentionally. So, but that relies on the webmaster making sure that for people who live in the same house or the same unit, that their address, their primary address, is exactly the same. So by doing this, you're stopping that type of error from occurring, but it also means the webmaster has extra work to do. And you need to go through your entire membership list in the members listing and check those primary addresses on all your residents to make sure the ones that live at the same household have the same address. Then the system, the survey app, can stop them from voting more than once. Okay, so we've gone through all the options, and again, that stuff is all in the admin help, so if you need any more information on those, you can look them up there. So that's the general setup for a question. So I'm going to save this question, and now when we come back, this is our list here, and you can see we have the speed bumps question, and when it expires, and then we can edit it again if we want. We can look at the votes on it, and then this data is actually an export, a CSV file, a spreadsheet file that you can export the data to for looking at. Okay, so let me briefly go into the options for the application. And this is just some general text like you have in every other app, documents, news, etc. for text you want to appear at the top of the page, where it lists all the ballots, or all the surveys, excuse me, for people to take. Custom image for the main page. This is standard in all of our applications. It's that little image that appears up here in the corner. It's usually a small icon of 100 pixels square. Okay, these options are, let's see, hide surveys and ballots that have not started yet. If you have a ballot or a survey that we just set up, like the one we set up before, there's a start date. And when you set up the start date, if you set it up as a future date, then it won't appear in this main listing. Let me go back. It won't appear in this listing when people go to it if the start date is in the future. So that's all that option does. It just says don't show them until they're ready to be taken. Hide expired surveys and ballots. This is a common one to check normally because after a survey has been expired, it's no longer, they can't take it anymore. You may want to hide it from the listing. The reason you might not do that is you want people to still be able to go in and view the results after it's expired. They want to be able to go and see it. So it depends on the way you intend to use your system for surveys and ballots. Hide taken surveys and ballots. This is an individual user option. In other words, or this applies to the individual user. If I, as a member, have taken a survey, then it won't appear for me if this box is checked. It takes it off the list. So when I go into the survey list, I may only see 2 or 3 surveys because I've taken all the rest, whereas a different member may go in and see a dozen surveys because they haven't taken any yet. So that this is specific to the user, whereas this one is just if they're expired, then it goes away for everyone. Hide the progress bar for multi-question surveys and ballots. This is a specific one that most people won't need to use. When you're taking multi-question surveys and ballots, there'll be a progress bar at the top of the page saying, question 1 of 5, question 2 of 5, or something similar to that, and has a little visual progress bar. You can hide that if you don't want that to appear while taking the survey. This is that option I was telling you about before, the featured surveys and ballots. When you add a special tag to your homepage, it will show you the featured surveys and ballots or the highlighted surveys and ballots. The ones that you've selected using that option we saw before to highlight a particular survey, those are the ones that will appear. This just says how big do you want the box to be for each of those. Again, this is for those little info boxes that you can have on the homepage. And there's a tag to insert them. I'm not going to get into that here because I want to stick with just going over how to create surveys and ballots for now. So we're going to go back to this is the admin listing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here and I'm going to create a couple more questions in here, just dummy questions that don't really have any particular meaning. And then I'm going to show you how to link them. Okay, we're back at the survey and ballots admin page, and you can see I've created some additional questions here. So now what I want to do is I want to link these together. And the main question is still this one, speed bumps. So I'm going to go in and edit this question. And at the bottom, you're going to see this Manage Linked Questions link. And when we click on that, it has already listed the speed bumps question that I've chosen as the main question because that's the one we came from. But now I get to choose the other questions. I can choose up to 10 questions to link together. So here I'm going to choose traffic control question 2, traffic control question 3, and traffic control question 4. And I can put them in any order I want, but I've chosen the order in which I've numbered them. And then I can update the links. Now what you'll see is it's changed. It now has these icons that show a little arrow that these are questions that are part of this because they're indented. You can see they're kind of under it, but indented. So they're not main questions anymore. And this little eye icon just means they're hidden. So again, you could choose to hide a survey by checking a box, but when I link questions to a main question, the system automatically hides them because we don't want to see them back over here in the main survey page. When I go here, I don't want to see all the questions. I just want to see the speed bump survey. So, and I can go back in here to edit it. So when I go back in here and I go into the Manage Linked Questions, we can see them here. And if you need to clear the links and start over, you can click this button. But now when I go back to the admin page, I can see them. And again, I can view the votes or the data, the CSV file for each question individually here. These reports do not show all of them together as one. It's individual. Each of these will show the individual votes for this question. Actually, one more thing I will show you is when you edit the main question, if you want to see how it's going to look after you've created everything, you can use this preview survey option. And no votes will be recorded. If you take the survey to see how it's going to look by going through this link or by going through the main surveys page and clicking on it, your vote will be recorded. Why is that important? Once you record a vote for a survey, it cannot be modified. Well, parts of it may be able to be modified, but most of it cannot. For example, I believe you can extend the expiration date on a survey, but you cannot change the question. You cannot change the answers because that would allow you to obviously change the meaning of the survey and switch all the yes votes to no votes, and that would be horrible. So once you take a survey, if you're testing it and playing around with it, don't actually take it because it's going to lock it and now you can't make a change to it again. The only way out of that is to delete it, which deletes any other votes. So if several people have taken it already and you decide you want to change it, you can't. And that's the reason why, because you could change the meaning of the survey. And then the way people voted wasn't the way it was originally intended. So in order to preview your survey, just to see how it's going to look, you can click on Preview Survey. And it will tell you in this red bar that you are in preview mode and no votes are going to be recorded. And here's that progress bar we talked about. You're 1 question out of 4. So should we have speed bumps? Yes. And again, these other questions don't mean anything. I just used question 2. I'm going to say no. I'm going to submit it. And there's question 3. I'm going to submit it. You see our progress bar has moved through. We're at the end. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to submit it. And this would normally come up and show you the votes that were recorded in terms of 20% for yes, 80% for no, or whatever the results were for each question. But because we're in preview mode, nothing has been recorded, so there are no votes for that question. So that is how you set up a survey and how you link multiple questions together to make a multi-question survey or ballot. And we went over the general options in the Manage Options page, and we've shown you how it looks when you preview it. Hopefully that will help you set up your first survey or ballot. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this helpful.